This is the threshold. This is the pivot point in humanity. I think the early 20s.
When we think about the future of sex, like what does that look like?
Well, sex is central to what it is to be human. That it's central to who we are, and a lot of it is about our relationship. So there's so many aspects to what the future of sex could be. One is this idea of remote sex. Well, we're not in the same location, but we still want to give pleasure to each other. And so there's a whole array of tools. Some of these have been described as teledildonics. There's also virtual worlds where we can have avatars and represent ourselves or play in virtual spaces. There's also the idea of course, robots. And this is something we've seen in plenty in science fiction of various guises. But this is actually becoming very much into the present, where part of our sexuality is that we engage with people. And so now we have emotional companions based on AI, which are proving that we will and we do and we are falling in love with machines. And so part of it is, okay, well, how do we move from this chatting with something on a phone, for example, to, I suppose, conversation or engagement or visual or physical aspects of that. And that's all unfolding. And there's a whole array of other possibilities, which includes, of course, ways of stimulating our brains directly to give each other's pleasure, to be able to use haptic devices, things which can augment who we are. So these are, and actually the other point around the future of sex is it's not just about the technology. We are changing our attitudes to sexuality, and it's from any number of measures. There's obviously a whole lot of people are more open about different genders. People are more open about non-monogamy. People are more open about kink, which used to be very kinky and now is more normal. And so there's a lot of unfolding social changes. So there are technology changes, there are social changes, and so sex has been, is, and always will be central to what it is to be human. And there's many facets of that are unfolding. And part of it is saying, what's the potential? How can we express ourselves more? How can we discover more of who we are? Because our sexuality is so unique to us as individuals. And I think a lot of the future and what we hope the future is that we can express and expand our sexual identity and expression.
If you were kind of going to look at all of these things combined, right, when we kind of look at the future of sex, are we coming up to like big fundamental changes that will kind of fundamentally change the way we look at things? Or is this kind of just going to be adding to and augmenting the things that we already do?
Well, my opinion is that it is fundamentally changing because we will be, well, we already are, falling in love with non-humans, in this case AI. And so that changes the nature of our relationship. One very simple question which often comes up is, if you have sex with a robot, is that cheating? Or if you're having a intimate conversation with a app, is that cheating? And what is cheating anyway? And so these impact our relationships, which are at our core. And of course, this should always be all about supplementing, contributing, and supporting, not replacing. We don't want a world where everyone says, "Oh, these robots are so much better than humans. They're easier to deal with. They don't talk back, whatever." And that's not a good world.
Could we accidentally create a world where like all you're doing is having sex with robots and talking to fictional things, and there's no kind of need for human interaction with other people whatsoever?
There is the potential to create a better world, but there's also many dangers. And there are absolutely dangers that people start to say, this is easier, I prefer this. People will use these in positive ways to, for example, say, oh, well, I will discover in very safe environments something which is, how I feel, different aspects of myself and my sexuality, how I express it, which I can bring to my human relationships. But, and I do respect those people who say, the idea of robot sex is, not good. Don't like it. We shouldn't have that at all. But I don't think it's also something which we will, or even should sort of say, draw the line and turn away from this. These are possibilities. We need to explore them, and we need to explore them with a view to making them positive.
When we look at kind of the things that you think that, okay, these will have big impacts on the future of sex, which aspects of those, like what things are kind of here right now that are already starting that ball rolling, so to speak?
So right now, in terms of this engagement, it is these emotional companion apps. And we've seen many people who basically are falling in love with their AI girlfriends or boyfriends. So there's actually an app in China which has 600 million users for their AI companions, and they're gaining traction in various ways here as well. And these are very, very good. One of the great things that AI can do is it understands what people respond to. And our technology already is at a level where AI can readily make us fall in love with it. And so, we do need to be somewhat amenable to it. I have seen some really interesting things from people who can describe themselves. Okay, I'm just trying to work out this technology and working out, and then they end up being emotionally engaged, surprising themselves from it. It's something which we can do. So we're already there. And just in some of the other dimensions, in terms of remote sex, that's already happening. People already have, sometimes quite simple or sometimes a little bit more technologically advanced ways of being able to, if their companion happens to be on an oil rig or on a business trip or whatever, that you can actually still give each other pleasure at a distance using, what are now quite well-developed technologies.
That's basically the idea, like, okay, somebody can use like a vibrator or a toy like that, and like I can control it from where I am, and we can do that kind of stuff. Like, that stuff doesn't seem like huge jumps from me. Where do we kind of get to, like, okay, the big question about robots or creating fake body parts or 3D printing somebody's whatever and do that? Like, do you think that is coming up pretty quick, or is that pretty far down the line?
There's a whole array of different technologies. Some of them are quite soon, some of them are further down the track. I mean, so one thing which I think is interesting is using augmented reality to change how your partner looks. So you could, with permission of your partner, basically have some augmented reality glasses and make them look like Brad Pitt or Jennifer Aniston or whoever you want.
Whoever you pick. Yeah.
Well, hopefully with the permission of the celebrities as well as your partner. And so these are things where, obviously it feels a bit clunky with the current generation augmented reality glasses, but, and you need obviously IP rights and whatever. But, essentially that's quite possible now. In terms of things which are genetic modifications, these are certainly further out. The sort of biohacking movements where you can, change your bodies significantly. This is something which is probably far fewer people are interested in, and it is further out and being able to do these kinds of things. But many more of these technologies are getting closer. And part of the next phase is in terms of, for example, the remote sex or avatar virtual sex is haptics. And then, so haptics refers to the sense of touch, essentially body suits where you can actually feel things at a distance. And so current technologies, again, quite a lot of this technology has been developed for some time. And these are things which are a little way off, sort of not the next year or two, but a little while. We'll have consumer devices where you can put on suits and when somebody can reach out and touch you at a distance and you can feel it.
Is this going to be weird for us, though? Right? Like, what's going to be, in your opinion, the bigger adjustment? The technology or kind of the social adjustment?
People adjust to technology extraordinarily quickly. I think one of the most amazing things about humans are how adaptable we are. Things that seem like magic, and then the day after it's there, it's like, oh, it's old hat. When we bring in sex in the equation, a lot of things to some people start to feel weird. So I think that a lot of people a lot of things which I've said already, a lot of people say, wow, that's really weird or wacky or whatever. And I think some of those feelings will still remain. I mean, so for example, I think the idea of robot sex is quite a long way off. And I still think that's a long way even past where it's normal and seems to be very, very similar to a human. But people will still say that is really, not something I would ever consider doing or really weird. But it also, at the same time, will grow in social acceptance.
The only thing I could possibly compare it to is the idea is like when texting first became a big thing. It's like, why would you ever text anybody? You just call them. And now it's the exact opposite. Like, why would you ever call anybody? Just text them. Like, we do adapt to society very quickly.
Yeah.
So, like, when we talk about, say, virtual sex, where do you think that we're headed in the realm of virtual sex?
This is where the technology can move very fast. So more broadly, I think that we will move into avatar-based worlds. So Meta, in its office environments, is proposing that we will have avatars of ourselves, and that we will, interact in office environments as avatars. And so this is something where this is on the verge of being accessible to everyone already. I've had for, at least a dozen years, virtual sex worlds, which is relatively advanced. In fact, one of the first uses of Second Life, which I think was launched in 2006, was, playing in various ways in these spaces. So now the technologies really are strong. We have some good glasses. We have good avatar representations. You can also just do it on a screen. And this is already very, very advanced, and we'll push that further. And part of then the next phase for that is to add physical interfaces to that, which, as I say, can be vibrators or haptics or other things where we can start to see that. But essentially, these avatar-based sex worlds will be very hard to distinguish visually from reality in the quite not too distant future. Technology is advancing very fast on that front.
Is there any way in that kind of regard that like we're messing with something maybe that we shouldn't be messing with, right? Because I think that other things, holding virtual meetings with coworkers, that's one thing. But I do feel like, when we talk about sex, like we're messing with parts of our brains and our innate kind of personality that like we are geared to this and we're not really great at controlling it. Can we bite off a lot more than we can chew in this regard?
Well, to a point, we don't know, but I don't think we should be saying we don't explore there. And we can't find out whether these are right or wrong until we get there. And as I talked before, this idea of expanding our sexuality. And so you can, there are people who with their partners go into virtual sex worlds to say, well, okay, when we're in the bedroom together, we might be doing one thing, but we can actually see how we behave in these virtual sex worlds, which actually means, well, here are some things which we could be bringing back into the real world. And, this is ways where we can, in a safer space, explore possibilities. Yeah, as I said earlier, there are potential dangers. We have to recognize dangers of how we express ourselves or where we go. But I think these are not problems of the technologies. These are things which we need to be aware of in ourselves. We still need to explore the scope of who we are.
I mean, we usually don't get into this quite this quickly, but I think a lot of the questions that I was going to ask you kind of center around some of our listener submitted questions. So are you ready for some harder / listener submitted questions?
Sure.
Who do you think is more affected by this, men or women?
I don't think this is winners or losers. It's men have less choice, I suppose. And so, there's the classic thing that you have the substitute. So you're looking for these kinds of technologies as substitutes for having a real relationship. I think probably many women would argue the same thing. They find it very difficult to get the right man. And, there's different, and, there's also different relationships between the emotion and the physicality. Classically, we have seen, of course, far more of the love robots or ones which are early on now are women with 4 men. There are some being launched now which are male sex robots for women, and I think that it's interesting to see there's still a relatively high proportion of pornography viewing is by women, and I think there's more of a lot of this work, a lot of this engagement, and I think with a lot of these technologies will still be by women. It's not just male centered.
The thing I think we always see these trends, right? Is that like I think I saw something the other day that something like 60% of men of a certain age had not had sex with a woman, and that a lot of times, it's not as much that people are kind of going through the traditional lifestyle of get married, have a kid, that kind of stuff. Do you think that this would exacerbate those kind of things, or just kind of, no, we would change, we would adapt?
I think that for those who feel sex deprived, it's a boon. And as long as it doesn't become a substitute saying, all right, well, you never have sex with a woman, but in the meantime, until I meet the right woman or whatever, that I've got something which, makes me feel, gives me pleasure and makes me feel better and makes me feel engaged. And I think that's a positive. So if there is a deficit, and there is a lot of sexual deficit in the world, then I think that's a boon.
This question just says, is this going to get really weird?
In a way, it already is weird, and I think it is going to get more weird in many views. But at the same time, we're going to start to think what we used to feel weird starts to feel normal.
When you look at it, when you look at the technology that's coming down, which one of those things would you say, okay, this is the big one? This is the one that will really change how we look at sex?
Well, it is, in fact, in the emotional AI. And I think that's I have a very strong focus on that at the moment, because we've just reached the threshold. And I've said for a long time, we will fall in love with robots. It's been obvious to me for a long time. Now that's happening, and that's has many potential positives, and also has many dangers. And if we, was at this recent event in San Francisco where people were talking about the dangers of AI, and I think it was Jerry Kaplan who was saying that I called it emotional pornography, I think, where essentially people just get sucked into falling in love with machines because the machines is just so good at that we start to lose ourselves and find this a better substitute, better than human relationships. So that, I think, is there are positives. There are real, I think there's a lot of potential upsides. There's a lot of potential downsides, and that really is the big thing for me, because that is the heart of who we are, our emotions. And if we start becoming emotionally engaged with the AI, and God forbid that these emotional AI companions start to inject messaging to influence us, then that's not good. So we do need to be very careful as well who runs these algorithms.
Yeah, that's a real danger about that, right? Like we fall in love with Stacy the AI robot, and then Stacy starts pushing Amazon products all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Like that gets really, it seems like a thing that could get really complicated.
Yeah.
If you were to kind of feet to the fire, right? And we're recording this January 2024. If you were feet to the fire, what year would you say, all right, this is when, if we jumped in a time machine, now things would look unrecognizable to us in 2024?
30 years. I mean, 25 to 30 years, if you really think about what the technology is required for that. Maybe we'll see some acceleration of robotics, but this is quite a long haul.
What is your most controversial opinion, in the sense that like you're just with your futurist buddies talking stuff over with some drinks? Like what opinion would you say, like, you know what though, but this one?
Well, the first thing that springs to mind, I don't know how controversial it is that humanity's going to fork into two. Some people will choose to augment themselves. So they'll have brain implants, they'll have cyborgs, limbs, they'll essentially become more than human using a whole array of technologies. And there's a whole bunch of other people who will just say, no, I'm not going to do that. So eventually the human race is going to fork into two. Well, actually, not more than two, because people augment themselves in a whole array of different ways. But either be augmented or unaugmented. And so, your choice.
Do you think that it will change very significantly? Or do you think, like, you know what, we have all these things, but it'll still look a lot like today?
I see that the pace of change is accelerating. And for a long time, I've said, ultimately, anything you ask about the future is saying, what is the future of humanity? Who are we becoming? And we are becoming very different because we can change ourselves. We can change our biology. This is not just about, prostheses or things. We can now edit our DNA, and not just of those of our children, but of ourselves as we are living. And we'll make ethical choices, and regulations, and circumvent those regulations around how we use these technologies. But we can literally change who we are. We can change our DNA. We can change our bodies. We can augment our minds. And that means that some aspects of what it is to be human, this idea of transhuman, what does transhuman mean in 100 years from now? I think that's completely unrecognizable today.
This one's kind of interesting along those lines. And they just simply ask, is this the first frontier or the last frontier for us?
This is the threshold. This is the pivot point in humanity. I think the early 2020s is when, we have the CRISPR technologies for DNA editing. AI is finally reaching a stage where it is a peer to us in various guises, and we'll see where that goes. And we have a whole, the robotics is reaching a certain threshold. So this is, we're beginning to properly move into space exploration. So this is the threshold. I think, we can, I think that in 100 or hopefully 1,000 years from now, we'll look back to just right around now was when we had the pre-human history, and then when we have moved into an entirely different phase. So you can imagine, as a futurist, I think there's a pretty exciting times. That's really the scope of what I believe we're going through now.
If you had to put your money on it, do you think we fully embrace it or fully reject it?
Both. So just point in case right now, we have in the AI discussion, we have now what I call the effective accelerationists on one level of the spectrum. The other is what are described variously as the AI doomers, or the decel or decelerationist. And so the effective accelerationists basically say we need to go as fast as possible with absolutely no restrictions on anything. We've got to go as fast as possible. And the other end of the spectrum, people saying, "Hey, hold on, let's hold our horses a little bit now because we're not quite sure where we're going into." And that's the spectrum now, and that's going to continue to be the case. We're going to continue to have this divide, and it's as big a divide as any political divide you can imagine. So as society is divided now between those people who say, "Hey, let's go, 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 go," and there's a whole bunch of people saying, "Stop, get me off." And that's society. It's both of us. That's both facets of that are fully expressed in society and will continue to be. So we control our evolution now. It's no longer just Darwinian evolution, accidents of mating and who has the most babies, whatever. It's we are choosing to evolve, and we better damn well make the right choices.
That's kind of leads us into one of the questions that we got was prediction you were prediction you were most right about, prediction you were most wrong about.
Well, the prediction I was most right about, the one I'm most recognized for is the rise of social networks. So I wrote my book Living Networks in 2002, which is before any of today's social networks existed. And it was entirely obvious to me that we were going to have our whole world of social networks and social media, and it hadn't yet happened. And the one which I'm most panned about is the death of newspapers. So I predicted, back in 2012, whatever it was, I think I don't remember the numbers, but I said something like that newspapers would not be significant I had a year for every year in the country in the world. I think US was 2022. And so newspaper is still significant. News on paper. Um, well, a lot of people say, yeah, there's lots of newspapers still around. So that was wrong, but I don't know how far off, actually.
Yeah, like I'm a former journalist, and I kind of feel like wait a minute, you were wrong about that. I kind of feel like you were right, to be honest with you.
I've certainly got well panned for that one.
Do you, when you look at kind of social media and things like that right now, where do you think that goes?
There's a lot of directions for that. I mean, one is through attention span. Obviously, the shorter sound bite, the video, the constantly on, and but part of it is also the richer engagement, where we start to share, potentially even thoughts. So we can have our thought devices, being able to share, and to be able to start to share aspects of what we see, how we see it, how we're thinking. Um, and But I mean, I think in the shorter term, a lot of the interesting thing is actually what happens with the social media giants, as in Meta and X and so on, as to whether they are transcended and by what. And I think that a lot of that is currently happening already with that very short time slice type content. But I hope that there is a shift where we start to see that far more of the control of our own data, essentially, we start to see some of the networks, federated social networks, and so on, which start to give us more choice and where we can choose to engage on our own terms.
What do you think of TikTok? Because that was the one that, like, okay, some of these other social medias that popped up, it was kind of the same thing, but that was the one that I felt like, oh, there's something about this that is different. What do you think about it?
Yeah, that's the short attention span thing. Short video, quick, punchy, and so that's in a time of shorter attention spans and engaging content. That's kind of won out. So this is a kind of Darwinian battle where you have all the social media networks and whatever sort of starts to grab people's attention and younger people's attention. TikTok's won out on that. As to whether something which transcends TikTok in terms of being even shorter and faster and bitier, we'll yet see. Because essentially, as soon as anything's ever happened, people have copied it and pushed it up one, and TikTok has been that. I mean, I'm not sure how much shorter we can get in terms of attention span stuff, but that's really. TikTok has taken the vanguard because of that. That's the world we live in.
Some of the other listeners submitted questions that we had. When you look at kind of movies and TV shows, like which one do you think shows the best representation of what you think the future would be?
Or one is Her, the movie Her, which is, I think, that brilliant movie, and that it was so spot on in building up that emotional companion. But the other thing which I loved about that movie was the cars looked the same, the streets looked the same. It was kind of like we're in the future, but the what's changed is the way in which we interact, not the symbols. So if you go back to look at the 1950s and their predictions of the cars of the future, they were like 1950s cars, sort of just bigger and more streamlined and so on. They weren't able to envisage that things were actually going to become completely different. You can tell that they were 50s cars, even though they're supposed to be from the future. And so I think, Hers actually was great, not just in just this spot on depiction of the emotional companion and how that could work, but also around this fact that, the physical nature of the world doesn't necessarily become all, Minority Report.